Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we kind of roll up our sleeves and really dig into the source material you send us.
Yeah, we love getting all those articles or reports and
Yeah,
then figuring out, what's the story here?
exactly. And today we're tackling a pretty, a pretty hot topic, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
the Social Security Fairness Act,
Yeah.
which
This one's been all over the headlines.
it really has. So for our listeners out there who may be feeling a little overwhelmed by all the coverage,
Oh, yeah.
we're here to break it down.
Absolutely. Cut through all that noise.
Yeah, make sense of it all.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating about this particular bill is how it kind of shines a light on a part of the Social Security system
Right.
that most people don't even realize exists.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, it's going to be a real aha moment
Definitely.
when they hear about it. And to kick things off,
Hmm.
maybe we can jump into a story that really illustrates like the human side of this legislation.
I think that's a great idea.
Um, imagine working your entire life as a teacher and then finding out that you can't collect your full Social Security benefits.
Yeah, that's the reality for a lot of people.
It is, and we actually have
Yeah.
a specific example in our source material. Evelyn Paternostro from Louisiana
Oh, yeah, I read about her.
taught for years, then was a
Yeah.
principal.
Right, decades in education.
Exactly, and now in her 80s, she's having to work at Dollar Tree
Can you imagine?
just to make ends meet.
It's heartbreaking.
It is, and this is a direct result of something called the windfall elimination provision.
Right, or WEP for short.
WEP, exactly, and this provision was originally intended to prevent higher earners with pensions from getting what were considered to be like, excessive,
Right, double dipping.
yeah, double dipping benefits from Social Security, but
But as Evelyn's case shows us,
Bless you.
it's not always that straightforward.
it isn't. So, for those who may not be totally familiar with the Social Security Fairness Act, let's kind of break down what it aims to do.
Okay, so basically, the bill wants to get rid of both the WEP and another provision called the Government Pension Offset, or GPO.
GPO, okay.
And these were put in place to prevent people from basically, you know, taking advantage of the system getting more than their fair share.
Right. So the argument for the act is essentially, it's just not fair to penalize these public servants.
Right. These are the teachers, the firefighters, the police officers.
Yeah, they paid into Social Security like everyone else,
Exactly.
and they deserve to receive the full benefits.
They've earned it.
They have. And I think proponents of the act would say, this is about more than just money.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about allowing these folks to, live with dignity and security.
Right. Have a comfortable retirement after years of service.
Exactly. And we're not talking about a small number of people here either.
No, this could impact millions.
Yeah, something like 2.5 million Americans, which is roughly 3% of all Social Security beneficiaries.
So it's a pretty sizable chunk of the population.
It is. But of course, like with any big piece of legislation, there are arguments against it too.
Yeah, there are always two sides to the story.
Right. And the main concern that we see raised by opponents is the cost.
The price tag.
Yeah. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that getting rid of WEP and GPO could add nearly $200 billion to the federal deficit over the next 10 years.
And that's a lot of money.
It is, and this has led to some pretty strong reactions, like Senator Ted Cruz saying that this bill would throw Granny over the cliff.
I saw that quote.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's worried about pushing Social Security towards insolvency.
Yeah, accelerating that timeline.
Right, which is a concern that a lot of people share.
They do, but I think it's also important to point out that this bill received overwhelming bipartisan support
That's true.
in both the House and the Senate,
Which is pretty rare these days.
it's incredibly rare, and it suggests that there's a pretty broad recognition that,
That something's not right with the current system.
yeah, that it needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
So you've got this really interesting dynamic where you have these passionate arguments on both sides,
Right.
but ultimately you've got this consensus that something needs to change.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway here.
It is, and to really understand, the concerns around the WEP, I think we need to dig a little deeper into how it actually works.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the formula itself is pretty complex.
It can be confusing.
It really can. And I think that complexity often leads to this feeling that people are being penalized unfairly.
Right, because they don't fully understand how it's all calculated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So can you walk us through, how the WEP is calculated and what makes it so controversial?
Sure. So the WP basically adjusts the Social Security benefits for people who also get a pension from a job where they didn't pay Social Security taxes.
Okay. Which is often the case for public sector jobs, right?
Exactly.
Oh.
And it does this by changing the way your average indexed monthly earnings,
AIM.
Yeah, your aim
Oh.
are factored into your final benefit amount.
So for those who may not be familiar, AIM is essentially a calculation of your average earnings over your highest paying 35 years of work.
That's right. It's a key part of determining your Social Security benefits.
It is. So how does the WEP change that calculation?
So instead of using the standard formula, which applies a certain percentage to different portions of your aim,
Okay.
the WEP reduces that first percentage used in the calculation. So for
Okay.
most people, the first part of their benefit is calculated using 90% of a specific portion of their aim.
Right.
But under WEP, this percentage can be a lot lower, especially if you worked for less than 30 years in jobs covered by Social Security.
So the fewer years you worked in those jobs, the lower that initial percentage becomes.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lower overall benefit.
Even if you've been paying into Social Security for a large part of your career.
That's right. But there is a safeguard in place called the WEP guarantee.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So this guarantee ensures that the WEP can't reduce your benefit by more than half of your non-covered pension.
Okay, so there are limits.
Yes, there are caps on how much your final benefit can be affected.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there's this attempt to strike a balance between, recognizing the contributions to Social Security,
Right.
but also accounting for those pensions.
From jobs that didn't pay into the system.
Right. But is that balance working?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. Is the formula truly fair? Or is it unfairly penalizing certain workers, especially those in public service?
That's what we need to figure out.
And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
We'll be back after a quick break. You know what really struck me about Evelyn's story is how it kind of challenges this assumption about the WEP,
Yeah.
that it only affects high earners.
Right.
But clearly that's not always the case.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
I mean, you wouldn't think of a teacher as being a high earner,
exactly. And the fact that she's working at Dollar Tree in her 80s, even with pension and Social Security contributions, it really highlights,
Potential shortcomings.
yeah,
I mean, these provisions.
it really does.
It does.
Hmm.
And I think, her story really puts a human face on the arguments for the Social Security Fairness Act.
Absolutely.
It reminds us that we're not just talking about, numbers and formulas,
Right.
but real people's lives.
Real people who are being impacted.
Exactly. And, for those who support the act, they see this as a fundamental issue of fairness.
Mm-hmm.
These are public servants
Right.
who dedicate their careers to serving their communities.
Yeah, and they shouldn't be penalized for that.
And they shouldn't be penalized in retirement for doing so.
Exactly.
And they've got some pretty powerful voices backing them up.
They do.
Organizations like the National Fraternal Order of Police,
Mhm.
the International Association of Firefighters, the National Education Association,
Yeah, all big names.
big names, and they've all come out in support of this act.
They see it as a necessary correction.
Yeah, to a system that hasn't always been fair to those who serve us.
Exactly. They feel like these workers deserve better.
They do. And their support, I think, really underscores this belief that the system needs to change.
But it's also important to, consider the other side.
Right.
Those who oppose the bill.
Absolutely. We can't just ignore those concerns about the potential financial impact.
Right. We're talking about potentially $200 billion.
Yeah. And that's not a small number.
No, it's a significant sum, and critics worry that it could put a strain on the Social Security system,
Absolutely.
a system that's already facing challenges,
Right. And it could hasten that insolvency timeline.
Exactly. And their concerns are valid. We need to be fiscally responsible, especially when we're dealing with programs like Social Security that so many people rely on.
Millions and millions of people.
Yeah, so it's a balancing act, finding that sweet spot between ensuring fairness for these workers, but also protecting the system as a whole.
Right. And some would argue that the WEP, while it might be flawed, it does serve a purpose.
In preventing overpayments.
Right. And helping to ensure that Social Security remains solvent for future generations.
And there are other ideas out there, too.
Like what?
Well, some have suggested revising the WEP formula itself.
Okay, making it more equitable.
Right. And others have said, the Social Security Administration needs to do a better job communicating how these benefits are calculated.
Right, just making it clearer for people.
Exactly. So people understand what they're entitled to.
So it sounds like there's a whole spectrum of viewpoints here.
Yeah.
Full repeal revisions, better communication.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It is, but what I find really fascinating is that even with all these differing opinions, this bill passed with such strong bipartisan support.
It did. Both Democrats and Republicans agreed that something needed to be done.
Yeah, even if they don't agree on the solution.
Exactly, and that's pretty remarkable.
It's incredibly rare these days.
And I think it speaks to the power of those personal stories.
Like Evelyn's.
Yeah, and the advocacy of those organizations
Right.
representing these workers.
They made their voices heard.
And Congress listened.
They did. And, it also raises this interesting question about how we value public service.
What does it mean to serve your community?
Yeah. Should these individuals who often choose careers that maybe don't offer the same financial rewards,
Right.
should they be effectively penalized in retirement for their commitment to serving others?
It's a tough question to answer.
It's a really tough question.
It really is.
That's a conversation I think that we need to be having as a society.
Absolutely.
So we've got a complex situation here.
We do.
A bill aiming to promote fairness, but concerns about the costs, the long-term impact, and this broader question about the value we place on public service.
Yeah, where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? And that's where we turn it over to you, our listeners.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
We've laid out the facts, the arguments, the stories.
Now it's up to you to decide where you stand.
Does this resonate with you? Do you see this act as a step towards a more just system? Or do you think it creates more problems than it solves?
It's a tough decision.
It is.
And it requires careful consideration.
Weighing the needs of those who would benefit against the potential impact on the system as a whole.
Right.
There's no easy answers here.
No, there really aren't.
And this debate, it's probably going to continue long after this act is signed into law.
I'm sure it will.
And it's a debate worth having.
Oh, absolutely.
To ensure that we create a system that truly works for everyone.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of this is that even within a complex system, like Social Security individual stories matter.
They do.
They have the power to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Evelyn's experience reminds us that behind these policy decisions, there are real lives at stake.
And it's a reminder to stay informed,
Yeah.
to engage in these discussions, to advocate for a system that's fair and just.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll be back with part 3, where we'll explore some of the broader societal implications of this legislation and what it might mean for the future of other social safety net programs.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been spending this episode really digging into the Social Security Fairness Act.
Yeah, looking at how it tries to make things more equitable for certain public servants.
Right, but I think this whole conversation kind of reveals a bigger issue.
Oh, definitely a deeper tension that's been building in American society.
Yeah, this kind of clash between fiscal conservatism
Right.
and the need for, strong social safety nets.
Yeah, it's constant back and forth.
It is, and we're seeing it play out more and more in our political discourse.
Absolutely. It's hard to find that balance.
It is that sweet spot where we can support those in need
Right.
without, putting the country's financial stability at risk.
It's a tightrope walk for sure.
And the Social Security Fairness Act, it kind of lands right in the middle of that struggle.
Right at the heart of it.
So on one hand, you've got those folks who are super concerned about the national debt.
Yeah, and the long-term viability of programs like Social Security.
Right. They look at this act and they think, this is irresponsible.
Adding billions to the deficit.
Right. Without addressing the root of the problem.
The underlying funding challenges.
Exactly. And their concerns are valid.
Oh, they are. We can't just brush those aside.
We can't. But then you've got this other side
Right.
who believe that fairness and social justice should be the priority.
Especially when it comes to those who have served the public good.
Exactly. And they argue that, provisions like WEP and GPO,
Right.
they unfairly penalize these people.
People who often work in jobs that don't pay as well as the private sector.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They chose careers dedicated to serving others.
Teachers, firefighters, police officers.
And now they're being hit with these penalties in retirement.
It's a tough situation.
It is. It really forces us to ask, what does fairness even mean?
Right. How do we define that in a society where economic realities often clash with our social values?
It's a big question.
It is.
No easy answers.
And it's a debate that's not going away anytime soon.
Right. It's going to continue for years to come.
But the fact that this act passed,
Yeah.
even with those potential drawbacks,
It does signal a shift.
a shift in how we're thinking about these issues.
Yeah, it could be a precedent for how we approach similar challenges in the future,
Not just within Social Security.
but across all social safety net programs.
Exactly. So it's definitely something to watch.
It is. And for our listeners out there, What does this all mean for you?
What's the takeaway?
It means staying engaged
Staying informed.
and making your voices heard.
Because this act is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right, as we try to figure out how to navigate this complex world of social safety nets.
We need to approach these conversations with nuance.
With empathy.
And a willingness to consider all sides.
Because the choices we make about how we support those in need,
those choices have huge consequences.
they shape the very fabric of our nation.
So we'll be watching closely to see how this act unfolds.
Yeah, what impact it has both on those who benefit from it,
And on the system as a whole.
and we encourage you to do the same.
Yeah, keep researching.
Keep asking questions.
Keep the conversation going.
Because informed citizens are the foundation of a strong and just society.
Absolutely.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the Social Security Fairness Act.
Thanks for joining us.
And until next time, stay curious.